Hi there, I'm Paula Jenkins. Welcome to my YouTube channel and part 3 of my series of discussions with William J. Peters. He recently put out the amazing book, At Heaven's Door, and it's all about shared death experiences. He is a grief practitioner, and he has so much to share about shared death experiences that I just can't wait for you to hear this last part of our discussion. And in this, we're talking about why people are not talking about shared death experiences and near-death experiences, and why as a society we don't really talk about death or dying in a proactive or productive way. And so that's the big topic we're discussing about today. I can't wait for you to tune in. Let's go right to that discussion. You also mentioned that you kind of gave the nod to this isn't something that most people are encouraged to speak about or that they don't speak about. Why is it that you feel like it's something that is not really a commonplace conversation, or, we're not talking about it the same way we talk about somebody stopping by for dinner? Like, why is that?
This gets to the mission of the Shared Crossing Project, but I'll start with it kind of to answer your question directly, and that is death lives on the margins of our modern culture. Unlike any other time in human history, even 100 years ago, people would gather for death and dying events in their community. Older homes have, a living room. Well, the living room is for the living. Well, there's another room. And if you notice, some of the older houses have a big entry room. If you look at an old house, and that in historic times was where the body would be placed so that the neighbors and the community come by and pay their final respects. Well, we have completely eliminated that in the modern home. And that's indicative of our relationship to death. We have exported death wholly to medical providers. And in so doing, it's moved it out of the center of our families and communities. And that's a huge loss, because it means that death isn't a part of the mainstream of our existence, quite frankly, and culture. So that's that one piece. One of the, I'll say, realities is we have a wonderful medical system, and it can really work miracles. I mean, just penicillin 70, 80 years ago kept a lot of people from dying of infection. But it's also given us some false hope that if you get a cancer diagnosis, let's say, most people begin an engagement that sounds something with their medical providers, sounds something like, I'm going to fight cancer. I'm going to wait for a cure. I'm going to fight it until a cure comes. There's this sense that somehow we can beat human disease in some way and go on living. Think about it. This is a very bizarre development in our modern culture, that we just think of death as somewhere out in the future that we don't have to engage with. What does that mean? Specifically, the shared death experience. Well, with death on the margins, you come in and you start talking about death. You've already got one strike against you. Who talks about death? What's the matter with you? You should not be talking about death. You're already a weirdo in some way. Then you bring up this other experience that's mystical, transcendental, that's not known in our culture, and that's a second strike against you. So I'm just being really clear about how this works, because I work with so many people who have these experiences. They come to me and they ask, the first question is, am I crazy? Did this experience happen? And the second question they ask is, are there others who've had it? Are there other ways that I can learn more about this? Like, it's the most profound experience, yet I've never heard anything about it. So think about the trajectory there. The most profound experience they've had in their life, and yet they wonder if they're crazy.
That's a tough space, right? I mean, especially because then we tie into this place of, both joy and grief or dying. Like, they're the extremes. We've brought ourselves into the center just to stay safe so we don't get shamed and embarrassed, and you can't be too much any of the time. And so I could see why wouldn't you talk about that? Well, polite people don't talk about, I don't even know why.
You talk about I hear you say this, the messy middle, and the death is the messy middle in our culture. And I use it. I love your use of that phrase, because It's the middle of this life and what lies beyond. It is the veil itself.
That is so good, William. It really is. It's like, and maybe that's why things, when they feel hard or when we're terribly afraid right now, it's really just a glimpse of whatever that transition. We are so afraid now to get too close to it that that's what will even put us in a tailspin. And so the messy middle gets kicked up. But that right there is really good about how the messy middle really is our transition to whatever is next. Thank you.
So yeah, so the other piece about this is we live in a society that is very research based and very increasingly scientific materialist. These experiences live in a invisible realm. We don't get to see it in our normal waking human experience. This scientific materialism is also the bedrock of medical sciences. And it's wonderful that it is, because it requires research and, all this great, double-blind studies and what have you, to make sure that the procedures that they exercise actually do yield the results that they're claiming. Well, part of this is that medical sciences believes that, and they don't have a lot of research to support this, but it is taught that the brain creates consciousness. So consciousness is dependent on the brain. So our individual sense of being alive is dependent on a brain.
Right. Kind of the I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
Rene Descartes isms.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
So for them, once you die and your brain shuts down, there should not be anything more. And yet, what we're finding, and this is both the NDE and the shared death experience, what we're finding is that people healthy in mind and body, caregivers and loved ones, will report that they saw their loved one leave this earth and go to another dimension. And we have a pattern for this now. We've identified it. Well, this is something the medical sciences has no theoretical framework to account for. So it's not safe. And you get this, you know this, even if you're not even cognitively aware of it. If you're in a medical setting and you share this, you may not be well received, or this experience may be, I always say, and I see this in the research, may be discounted, dismissed, or disparaged. And you know this when you're in a medical setting. If you don't know it, you will probably have an experience that leads you to believe that was probably not the best thing to share. Now, I say that, but there are so many wonderful hospice nurses and end-of-life practitioners and chaplains and spiritual care, not as many medical doctors. They're the most highly trained and steeped in this model. But everybody else who provides the care for you is generally open to these experiences. I can't say that for everybody, so I don't want to paint a very overly negative picture. But I will say to you that there's not room for these experiences to be shared openly. My research group has published the first article on these experiences based on our robust research in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. And this is the first significant study of any kind. And I will say the reviewers, thankfully, stated they were, I dare say, happy about this, because they said, we know these experiences happen, but no one's ever been able to study them in the way that you seem to have been. And that was because I have been talking and doing research and speaking nationally and internationally at a variety of conferences for almost a decade. And as I've done this, more and more people started coming forward to share these experiences. I mean, we have so many experiences. If your listeners have an experience, that we welcome them. We continue to collect them and document them and analyze them and learn more. But the point being is that this experience, I think an analogy would be, think of the near-death experience in the mid-'70s when Raymond Moody first wrote his book, Life After Life, and introduced the near-death experience in a big way. We think this is going to happen for the shared death experience because we know they happen. We know that. Look at you. We're just having this interview here, Paula. And hey, by the way, I had this experience.
I've had this experience. Well, and I think it is very interesting because even back at UC Santa Barbara, I was a religious studies major and we studied NDAs. And it still felt a little like taboo, like, ooh, we're getting a little too close here. And I mean, so I'm grateful for having had that experience and then having had on, yourself and Sharon and talking about shared death experiences. I'm happy to share the word about it because I think it's very interesting that we just close down and don't talk about it. And assume that, oh, it was just me, or it was just a fluke, or it was just a fleeting thing and I imagined it, or I mean, just kind of to wrap back around as well with like you having had an experience of an NDE early on. I mean, I could also see that having had my grandmother visit, sure, is maybe that why I went into religious studies? Is that why I took biblical Hebrew? Is that like there's a through line here that is way beyond just like what's obvious to the eye.
A great question about how that your SDE with your grandmother impacted you, the role that played in you unconsciously, largely.
Mhm.
I think for me, there's no doubt about it that it, as I've already shared, but then again, I wasn't talking about it either.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you like this one, make sure you go back and listen to parts 1 and 2, where we're talking about his book a little bit more in detail. And we're talking about what is a shared death experience. So go back and tune into those. If you like content where people are talking about what brings them joy, how they navigate things in real life, and where there's lots of conversation with industry experts, be sure and hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be growing this channel just as I do my own podcast, which is also Jumpstart Your Joy. The link to that is also in the description, as is the link to William J. Peters' book. But if you like this kind of content, good news is I've been creating it for over 7 years. And so if you subscribe, you'll be sure to get even more of it each week as I put out new interviews. Thanks so much for tuning into this video, and I hope you'll come on back for the next one.